You're awake.
We're awake.
So far.
So far.
And the good news was there was no smoke. I love those kind of alarms.
Why did the alarms go off?
Well, they
Spider goes into it or something.
tell me, you know, things happen, strange things happen at night. It's always in the middle of the night.
That sounds like, you know, our systems guy, whenever I bring up an issue with our database, you know, at the library, his response is, it does that sometimes.
Yeah. If it hadn't been the same day that somebody was coming at, when did he get here, 8, to take out the tiling in the kitchen, and then we had somebody else come in the afternoon to laser for the new countertops. I mean, and the coffee pot, I think that was the real crown.
What happened to the coffee pot?
It just, Mr. Coffee just
died.
Didn't turn on, wouldn't turn on.
Oh. Well, at least it didn't light on fire or something.
No, because we had moved
fire.
it, because we had to take everything off the kitchen counter for the people's work. And it didn't like being moved, so we put it back in its own little position and still doesn't want to, just doesn't want to come on.
No pumping water. So luckily we had a drip coffee maker. I think when we first got married, my mother gave it to us. It still works. You just do it by hand. You pump it by hand. Oh.
It's just a drip, yeah.
Oh, there.
Where's the dog? I haven't seen the dog yet.
Oh, the dog.
Dog.
We should sit up at the table where we're out of her reach.
She's brought the ball to us. Oh, you're gonna come around this side now? Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, so she has to be here. Okay. That's the dog. We got the dog. All right, you've made an appearance. Can you go? Sit. Good dog. Okay, you stay right there.
Your kids leave home, but then these things move in.
It's like having a kid that never grows up.
Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't leave stuff in your attic.
No. And you can lock them in a room and leave the house and nobody will arrest you.
What are you doing?
Good. Long day. How about you?
The same. Okay. Carol. Nancy.
Oh, look at there. Okay.
400. They're back. Well, just 2 weeks ago, you can see this.
Hi, Carol.
Okay.
A week ago, our testing positivity rate was about 17%, and we had 1,000.
Hello, everybody.
17% rate was new record high, 23.68%.
And then last March, making her eligible for the monthly child tax credit. Peter has been book banking on the extra financial help. I have logged on the IRS website so many times this year trying to figure out how to find and plans to file her taxes as soon as possible.
There's Ray.
Oh.
Important windfalls, probably the largest windfall that most of us get. If you collected unemployment benefits or out of work in 2021,
Pastor Heidi.
You're going to have to pay taxes on those benefits. If you didn't get a stimulus check and are entitled to one, claim it on your taxes. And as for the child tax credit, while parents may be owed money, there's a caveat. You may end up owing more than you think because income rose throughout the year, for instance. Case when you may not get as much on your taxes as you think. And most importantly, experts suggest filing electronically.
Getting somebody's television.
Faster. Rural NBC News.
Yes.
A terrific weekend in the NFL. To be cancer, ask people what you want and need.
Hi, Mitch. Can you hear me, Mitch?
Yes, I can hear you, David.
Is that, I don't know how loud that.
Okay. So I did get an email from Janet, and she had to go to Manhattan, so she won't be joining us this evening. And Kirsten had a long day as well, so she is going to take a break. But again, these things are recorded, and Lee's pretty quick about getting them up on the website.
Having a simple 48 hours of football. 4 walk-offs, 3 game-winning field goals, and a window into a new generation of league leaders.
There. So tonight we are, if you're following in your notes, so it's Professor Cohen's Hebrew Bible lecture, and it's lecture number 12, which is page 34 of 37. They're divided into 2 parts, the first 37 pages. So, and we're talking about P, or the priestly religion. I guess I was thinking today about the Bible as maybe being like a river, and there's numerous tributaries coming into it. And so you'd have different sources, different streams feeding the scripture.
Look at the rest of their careers.
Long-time Bucks fans just appreciating the ride.
We just watched history.
Does somebody have the TV on?
Not God, but it's pretty close.
I'm hearing a sports report.
Replicated. Now eyes, its future. Sam Brock, NBC News.
Some amazing performances. That's
So anyways, where was it? Okay, so tonight we'll be talking about P, and so it basically is a source of a lot of what we look at as the laws, and he will be talking about purity things and stuff, and then eventually we'll be going into Deuteronomy, which was actually when was the subject of actually reading when they were reading about past Nehemiah and all that stuff. So anyways, it kind of feeds in with the reading from this week. So so does anybody have any questions? You can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, we will proceed with the lecture. It's Professor Cohen, and then we will discuss it afterwards. And so, actually, I don't see Dale coming in yet. Maybe I'll kind of tap dance here for a minute. So, or maybe I won't. Well, I will keep an eye out for her. See if she tries to join. But I think it's 7:00, it's almost 10 after.
I'm not hearing anybody. Can anybody hear me?
Can you hear me?
No.
You can't hear me. Can anybody not hear me? Is everybody hearing me okay? Okay. So you're not hearing, Carol?
Okay.
Okay, I can hear you. This does remind me of a seance. If you get. So you can hear me okay, Carol, or not? I don't want to go forward with that unless you can hear me. Are you okay, Carol? Can you hear me on the other side?
Mitch, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
I don't think so.
Coming through loud and clear with here on here. Now you're muted, which is okay because we're going to proceed with the film. So. So you are muted, Carol, which is okay, as long as you can hear me. Can you give me like a thumbs up or something?
Okay, am I muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted, and can you hear me? Okay, nobody's saying anything right now, so you won't be hearing anything. Okay, now you're muted. Oops, didn't mean to do that.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, you were unmuted. And you can hear me.
Are you hearing me, Mitch?
I'm hearing you just fine. Are you hearing me?
I don't think she's hearing you, Mitch.
Yeah, I don't know how to. Diane, oh, well. David is saying to check your speaker volume, Carol.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now just fine.
Phew. That sign from David is greatly appreciated, saying check your volume. I forgot that I had turned it off the other day.
Okay, all right. Now that we got that fixed. So now I'm going to mute you so that we can proceed.
Okay.
I'm sharing the screen, sharing the sound. There.
So today we're discussing P, the so-called priestly source. Next Wednesday, a week from today, we'll be discussing D. P and D go together like ham and eggs. No, that's bad. Well, anyway, horse and buggy. They are a beautifully balanced pair, P and D. And then we'll be finishing up the Torah on Friday's lecture next week. So today is P. We've already met P, of course, in Genesis chapter 1, where we think that's the P version of the creation story. Right, so whether P in fact is a continuous narrative source or P simply has stories here and there, this point is not clear to us. So one open question is whether P is a full narrative like J. Assuming you believe in all these things, right? J is the master narrator of the book of Genesis. Is P also similarly have a large continuous narrative? This is, I believe, an open question. A famous question about P is the date. we'll come back to this again briefly in our discussion of D, is the date. According to the traditional Bible scholars, P is exilic. Exilic. What does that mean again? Exilic is when, class? Post 587 BCE, when the Judeans are exiled to Babylon. So exilic is from the period of the exile, 6th century BCE. So the old view said P is exilic, 6th century BCE. It already reflects the destruction of the temple, the exile, the catastrophe, the reordering of Israelite religion into something we might want to call Judaism. This is the old classical view. A response to that view is that no, you've got it all backwards. P is not exilic at all. P is in fact much, much earlier. P is pre-exilic. Whether it's pre-Deuteronomy or not is an interesting question, but it is pre-exilic. What hangs in the balance in this otherwise impenetrable scholarly controversy? What hangs in the balance is, well, whether you like a religion of ritual or not. If you don't like a religion of ritual, let's say you are a German Protestant, let's say, a liberal German Protestant of the 19th century, then you don't like a religion full of ritual, then for you, P is late. It represents the last dying gasp of biblical religion. And if you are a Jew, for example, who likes a religion full of ritual, you would say P goes back into Israelite times. And if you are a well-disposed, benevolent Christian standing on the sidelines, you may be confused. I believe that's where we stand on the debate about P. We'll come back to that. That's the very interesting question. In the last 20 years or so, there's a lot of discussion about H. We don't have enough alphabets and letters in our alphabet stew. We want more. So now we discover that P is itself a two-tiered source. There's a P, and then within P there is H. I'm not bothering to go discuss what is H. H is Leviticus chapter 19, which is one of everybody's favorite chapters in the Bible. Write that down. Professor Cohen thinks Leviticus 19 is one of the favorite chapters in the Bible. That may be useful information after the midterm. We get to the final. Just remember that. And that is H. H meaning holiness. God says to the people of Israel, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Leviticus 19, verse 1. That is a holiness source. I'll come back to that very briefly today, and I'll try not to come back to it too often. But anyway, that's a source of modern scholarly controversy too about whether there is a thing called H and whether H, how we understand how that source fits into P. And last but not least, P and R is another open problem. If you date P late, i.e. if you think it's exilic, then some people have argued that P is the same as R. P is the mapping up guy, the guy who comes at the end and puts it all together and makes a book. Or not. For that. This is by way of introduction saying that modern Bible scholars themselves who believe in all these things, I am of two minds on the subject, as you know, who believe in all these things can't quite figure out how to make everything fit. Right? In other words, there is much that is uncertain, much that is a subject of debate. Okay, that's by way of general introduction. Let's get that out of the way. P is best known for its legal materials. Right? The second half of the book of Exodus, when the narrative stops, you recall, the narrative stutters to a halt, and then the entire book of Leviticus, and then most of the book of Numbers, we attribute that to P, and the bulk of all of that large amount of material, the bulk of that is legal or ritual, not narrative, not stories. Rather, do this, do that, do this, do that, thou shalt not. Right, that's what P is best known for, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have, I think, 5 themes in this P legal ritual material. Again, second half of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And here are the 5 themes: tabernacle, sacrifices, priesthood, purity, holiness. Each of these is a mouthful, and each of these could people have written books on each of these, so we'll try just to fly quickly over this very, very challenging terrain. First is the tabernacle. This is an important theme in P. The tabernacle, let's say the usual English translation for the Hebrew word Mishkan, right, which is the place where God dwells, or God's indwelling. God resides, or God's abode, something like that. That's the Mishkan. It is also called in various parallel passages the tent or the tent of meeting, which I'm not going to worry about now whether that's the same as the tabernacle or something similar to the tabernacle. But I'm just going to not worry about that and just move straight along. So, the tabernacle or the Mishkan. Typically in the ancient Near East, temples are the house of the deity. Right, the house of the deity. This is where the deity dwells. Typically, we build the temple, and God, or the God, is in the temple. This is his house. This is his throne room. Right? God is enthroned in the temple. Or typically in the ancient Near East, in various places, we have God resides in the heavens, but God's footstool, God's feet, reach down to the ground and are in the temple. In other words, no matter what metaphor you use, there is a sense that the temple is the meeting place between the heavenly realm, the divine realm, and the earthly realm. That's what a temple is about. In the tabernacle, the center piece of the tabernacle is the ark, right? The Ark of the Covenant. And all of you saw Indiana Jones, so I don't have to explain that to you. Right, so the Ark of the Covenant, upon which were the cherubim, or in Hebrew, keruvim, some mysterious angelic-like creatures which apparently were meant to serve as a divine footstool. This is P's conception. How do we know that God is actually in the tabernacle? Answer, a pillar of smoke. There's a cloud. There's fire in this mysterious, and this is the very end of the book of Exodus. After Moses has erected the tabernacle, right, the tenant moves in. The tenant, God, moves in. How do we know that God has moved in? It's a big pillar of cloud, pillar of smoke that has marched into the temple, and Moses can't go in now because God is there. That's P's conception. Or fire. Maybe one's by day, one's by night. You can't see the cloud at night, so at night you have a fire, during the day you have a cloud. P, anyway, seems to discuss that. You and I might wonder about P's theology. If P really thinks that God is represented by the pillar of smoke or a pillar of fire, then where is P's idea of God as the universal God, the creator of heaven and earth? Genesis chapter 1. How do we take God and squish him, it is a him, squish him into a tent shrine represented by cloud and fire? P, don't you worry about that. Don't you understand how your theology has an inner contradiction? Well, how P would answer that, I'm not sure. We'll come back to that the week from Friday when we talk about theology in the Torah. I know the book of Deuteronomy, I know the Deuteronomist, the Deuteronomistic narrator, about whom more next week. English translation, the author of the book of Kings. I know the author of the book of Kings is aware of this problem. Solomon has just built a multi-million-dollar temple, right, for the God of Israel, right? Super fancy schmancy, gold everywhere you look, inlay, et cetera, et cetera. And then what does Solomon say at his introductory speech, right, when we're about to launch this new temple? Solomon says, "Even heaven and the highest heaven cannot continue, much less this house that I have built," unquote. So Solomon says, yes, this temple, for all its magnificence, is inadequate, because God, after all, is everywhere. So the author of that little speech, be it Solomon or not, I don't know, the author of that speech is aware of this tension. How do we take a universal God and squish him into a little building? P does not seem to be aware of this problem, or I cannot find any passage in P where he reflects on this tension between a universal God who somehow occupies religious space. And if you say in response, but Professor, isn't that true? Don't all religions have that problem? I mean, how about Christianity? How about Judaism? I would say, yeah, it's a problem. Okay, now we get involved in discussion of what is sacred space, or how different religions and cultures understand sacred space. If it's a metaphor, it's one thing, but it's actually the house of the deity, then you have this mysterious tension, the universal God who lives in a small house. P seems blissfully unaware of this problem. Okay, so where does God live then according to P? The house of God. So while the Israelites are in the desert, they have the tabernacle. What is a tabernacle? It's a portable tent shrine. It's a tent, it's a shrine, and it's portable. The Levites, the job of the Levites is to pack it up, roll it up, put it onto wagons, and carry it to the next destination, stop, unpack it, unfurl it, reassemble it, ready to go. So it's a portable tent shrine. It will be replaced when the Israelites finally get to the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, and conquer it. It will be replaced by a building that is built by King Solomon. King David having laid the plans for it, King Solomon actually executes. That's the story in the book of Solomon, in the book of Kings. Right, this is the glorious building built by Solomon. So we go from a portable tent shrine to a fancy deluxe building. That's the storyline if you read straight from the book of Exodus into the book of Kings. The problem is that we don't understand what's going on with this tent shrine. The temple, we understand what a temple is. This mysterious portable tent shrine has analogs in the ancient Near East, but at the end of the day, the biblical narrative is extremely cryptic. And it's not clear to us if the tabernacle was real or imagined. D, the book of Deuteronomy, does not know about a tabernacle. D does not mention a tabernacle. It talks about an ark, the Ark of the Covenant. That's in the book of Deuteronomy, but not the tent shrine. And when we get to the book of Kings and read the narrative as the Israelites enter the land of Canaan in the book of Joshua and Judges, and then they start to set up a settled society, the book of Samuel, and finally the book of Kings, we finally get to King David and Solomon building the temple, you have to ask, where is the ark? Where is the tabernacle? What happened to it? Answer. We hear about the ark, but we don't hear about the tabernacle. This has led many people to argue the whole thing is a fiction. The whole thing is P writing with his overheated imagination, trying to imagine the Israelites constructing some analog to the temple at which they worshipped while in the desert. Why would P make up such a story? What do you gain by imagining a portable tent shrine accompanying the Israelites in their wanderings in the desert? Answer, I'm not sure. My best answer is what I give you on my lecture notes. The temple is, as constructed by Solomon, laid out by David, constructed by Solomon, it was a royal institution built by the king, something like the royal chapel of Henry VIII, right, under the thumb of the king. The priests, high priests included, are all under the thumb of the king. Perhaps the fantasy here of P is to imagine a shrine where there is no king. The fantasy is we are completely in charge. We priests run the show and there's no king. Many scholars have argued, in fact, that building of the temple by King Solomon was a religiously revolutionary act, and that led to, or at least aided and abetted, the split of the northern tribes, who you recall, after Solomon's death, break off. And they built, and Jeroboam, you recall, builds those two shrines at Dan and Bethel, featuring a golden calf. In other words, he's harking back to a different kind of worship. We don't like this temple that you built, Solomon. We never had a temple before. So some scholars have argued there's lurking here, there's a tension between what kind of shrine do we want. And P either imagines or embellishes or preserves accurate detail, I don't know, about a tent shrine once upon a time. It's not a temple, it's a tent shrine, there's no king in sight, we priests run it, and that is our model of institutional piety. If you don't like that explanation, fine with me. Then I'll turn around and say to you, okay, you tell me why you think P invented the story of a tabernacle in the wilderness, which we all agree on the face of it is completely implausible. To imagine how the Israelites, escaped slaves from Egypt, are going to come up with these valuable and precious woods, jewels, gold, silver, cloth, stone. Where do they get this stuff from? Not to mention dolphin skins. So the tabernacle is a problem, but that's central to P's vision of the Israelites in the wilderness. I'm also mystified that P does not contain a commandment anywhere in P, the children of Israel, in which God spoke to Moses saying, when you conquer the land of Canaan that I am about to give you, following the covenant with the ancestors, first thing you need to do is when you get there is to build me a temple, because I'm tired of schlepping around this little portable tent. Unquote. There is no such passage in the Torah. There's no passage anywhere, certainly not in P, that God instructs the Israelites to build a temple. So there's a very deep waters here. There's something going on here with this tabernacle and the tension between the tabernacle and the temple. I'm not sure if I parsed it correctly, and I'm not sure that we have enough data to make sense out of this, but there's something interesting going on here. Okay. Number 2, sacrifices. What do we do in the tabernacle? What happens in the tabernacle? At the center of the Israelite encampment in the wilderness, we have the priests officiating in the tabernacle. What do they actually do? Answer, they sacrifice animals. Which animals? Either big ones, oxen, cows, medium-sized ones, sheep or goats, or little ones, birds. No fish, no wild animals, no impure animals. So a certain subset of all the animals created by God. This reminds you of Genesis, where Noah brings into the ark pure and impure animals, by which that passage means animals eligible for a sacrifice. Those are the pure animals. These are the ones that are offered on the altar in the tabernacle and later on the altar in the temple. Let's make sure we understand what happens at this site. So the priests are the ones, you recognize them because they have these long, sharp knives. They slaughter the animal. Footnote, we're not giving any details about how Israelite slaughter works. The only detail we know about is that not to consume blood. But actually how they slaughter the animal, we don't know. So back to where we are, they slaughter the animal. Then the carcass is processed in different ways, depending upon exactly what the sacrifice is. The blood is processed in special ways in order to remove the blood. The blood is a life force, Leviticus 17. So you need to pour out the blood somewhere. That's described also for each sacrifice. Then the carcass is hoisted up onto the altar, and it is roasted. There's a fire burning there, and there's fat running off, on the altar, and it's a complete mess, right? Running off from the altar. And finally, we remove the roasted carcass from the altar. Sorry, it depends. Some sacrifices, it just sits there and gets burned up to completely consumed, which if you are a Marxist materialist, you would say is a complete waste of protein, right? Whereas other animals, other sacrifices, we remove the carcass, and then we have a feast. priest gets some, the person who brings it gets some, and we have a feast. That is the worship at the tabernacle, as described in the opening chapters, the first half of the book of Leviticus, and then we assume the ritual as carried forward in the temple in Jerusalem. Among these sacrifices, some are private, some are public. Again, some are brought by the community on behalf of the people of Israel, or some are private. Joe, Israelite, shows up with Mrs. Israelite and their little Israelite kids, and they have a sacrifice there, which are private offerings. The most important of these is the Tamid. The Tamid is the continual offering offered every morning and every evening at the beginning of business day, the end close of business day, is the Tamid Sacrifice. Described in the book of Numbers. This is, the Tamid means continual. This is God's food, as is described in that wonderful passage in the book of Numbers, which reminds us of the passage in Genesis where Noah offers a sacrifice after the flood, and God smells the sweet savor. Oh, I love a barbecue, is what God says. And God says, then I shouldn't kill these people. They offer me such sweet savor, right? I can't kill them again in a flood. I won't do that again. I like this too much. Right. So what I'm getting at with all this is that we modern people have absolutely no conception of the religious dimension of all this. We are clueless. We who go to the supermarket and buy a steak wrapped in saran wrap on a styrofoam tray, we are completely clueless about the religious power involved in slaughtering an animal, draining it of its blood, taking the carcass, putting it on the altar, and roasting it. If you take Religion 101, or Anthropology 101, you will spend time talking about the religious power of sacrifice because it's found everywhere in human societies. Almost everywhere, almost from the Aleuts to the Zulus. So the usual explanation is that ultimately these are all substitutional. I'm slaughtering the animal, I'm killing the animal because I hope that the God will not kill me. Right, here God, you have this dead cow, don't kill me. The kind of substitution idea, what we saw, you recall, in the Paschal story, the Paschal lamb. Right, slaughtering of the lamb is apotropaic. Remember that word? Right? Averts danger, keeps danger at bay. So many scholars, anthropologists have argued that's ultimately at the heart of the sacrificial ritual. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know. I'm simply saying that we moderns are so worlds removed from this world that we don't understand the religious power which clearly sacrifice had. I know that it had power because it endured for, 1,000 years, more or less. In ancient Israel, and in many cultures it endures still. The most problematic of these chapters is Leviticus 17. Leviticus 17 says, any time you kill an animal for food, any time you slaughter an animal, do not partake of the blood, do not partake of the blood, do not partake of the blood. It's repeated several times in that chapter. Except you need to bring it to the altar. Right? God has his share. You're killing a living creature. It belongs to God. You have to bring it to the central altar where it to be slaughtered and roasted. Now, if you imagine the Israelites living in the tabernacle, living in the wilderness, well, they're living here in the encampment, and there is a tent of meeting in the middle. So I guess you want to slaughter.
I'm sorry, folks. We've got a phone call from Dale that she's trying to get in, so I'm going to try and take care of that. There she is.
Okay.
Here we are. Oh,
Animal to have a steak for dinner, then I guess it's not so inconvenient. But later on, when you imagine the Israelites living in the land of Canaan, where they're living in the entire, what we now call the land of Israel, and adjacent areas as well, then you mean to tell me that if I want to get a hamburger for dinner, I need to take my animal down to Jerusalem, to the Tabernacle, and slaughter him? That makes no sense. So Deuteronomy solves this problem. Deuteronomy, as we will see next week, Deuteronomy solves the problem by allowing what we call secular slaughter or profane slaughter. I can make a distinction between killing an animal for a sacrifice at the altar and killing an animal just for food. I'm allowed to kill an animal for food in my backyard, as long as I don't eat the blood. But I'm allowed to kill the animal for food. When I want to bring an animal to the deity, I bring the animal to the central shrine. That's Deuteronomy. That I understand. Leviticus 17, I don't understand. This is complete mystery. Who imagines that every time I slaughter an animal, I must perforce bring it to the central altar at the central shrine. Then I can take it home and have a hamburger. Or have a steak. We're all very puzzled. If P is making this up, and it sure looks like he's engaging in some kind of fantasy here, then what on earth is he trying to accomplish? And how does he imagine this being practicable? Answer, I, Shaye Cohen, don't know. I am much puzzled by Leviticus 17, and if any of you have any bright ideas how to make sense out of it, I'll be happy to hear you. It's very troublesome how Leviticus 17 imagines Israelite society functioning. So he's imagining a world in which everybody's living right next to an altar. Okay, so first theme, tabernacle. What happens in the tabernacle? Sacrifice, slaughter of the animals, roasting, eating. 3, who does the slaughter in the tabernacle? Answer, priests, or Hebrew, Kohanim, the plural of Kohen, plural of Cohen or Kohen. So the priests of the tribe of Levi. In Hebrew we say Levi, in English we say Levi, which in the context of the book of Leviticus means Aaron and his sons. Aaron and his sons are the priests, and the tribe of Levi is bigger than Aaron. So we have a distinction in the text between Levites, members of the tribe of Levi or Levi, on the one hand, and priests, who are also from the tribe of Levi, but from a specific clan within the tribe of Levi. Priests are top dog. What? Easy for me to say. Well, it's obviously true. Right. Priests are top dog. The Kohen reigns supreme in the tabernacle. Whereas the lowly Levites, they're very useful. They pack and unpack and are just plain support staff. Those are the Levites. So the priests officiate, they do the heavy lifting, metaphorically speaking, and the Levites do the actual heavy lifting, packing and unpacking. Modern Bible scholars, and indeed all of us, are puzzled at this system, how both Levites and priests both come from the same tribe, and yet one group is clearly superior to the other. And why we have this two-tiered system and how this came about is, in fact, a real mystery to us. We assume there was a long and complex story here. Right? There's a historical explanation for this, but that history is hidden from us. So, Genesis chapter 49, you recall, Jacob's blessing of his children. So Jacob, you recall, does not say nice things about the first 3 brothers. Right? Reuben is no good because he had some forbidden sex, so he's out. He loses his primogeniture. Simeon and Levi are men of violence, therefore they're not going to amount to very much either. Judah, number 4, he's the one who's going to be the royal one. That's the blessing of Jacob. So Jacob knows in Genesis 49 that the Levites are landless. But he doesn't know yet, Genesis 49, that in return for being landless, the Levites will turn out to be the priestly tribe. That's not mentioned in Genesis 49. But if you look at Moses' final blessing of Deuteronomy 33, then Moses knows that the Levites are landless, and he also knows that the Levites are going to serve as priests. Well, that's an interesting point. So something has happened between these two chapters. And then we have texts like the Revolt of Korach, you recall, where you can see clearly tension between Aaron, or the Aaronites, Aaron and his sons, versus Levites. In that story, God clearly endorses the Aaronites, and the Levites are told to mind their manners and know their place. That's in the Korach story. Whereas you recall in the golden calf story, it's Aaron who is besmirched by that story, and it's the Levites who are the ones who are loyal to God. So I deduce from this that there is in fact tension between the Levites as a whole and the Aaronite clan in particular. But the Aaronite clan are the ones who achieve prominence. And the Levites somehow get stuck in second place. But we don't know how or why exactly this happened and how the Levitic tribe lost its landholding and became the priestly tribe. When we get to D next week, we'll see Deuteronomy regularly refers to the priests, the Levites, Kohanim HaLeviim, sometimes translated Levitic priests, as if Deuteronomy is trying to efface this distinction and say it's all the same. That's next week. So we have priests officiating in the tabernacle. We have Levites assisting them, according to P's imagination of the Israelites in the wilderness of old. How do you get to be a priest or a Levite? How do you get to be a Cohen? Answer, because your father is a Cohen. How did he get to be a Cohen? Because his father was a Cohen. There are a lot of old jokes about this. I won't tell you about the old Jewish joke on this one. Right. So you're a Cohen because your father is one. So it's what we call in the business a caste. Right? It's a genealogically or pedigree, a group defined by its pedigree. So it's a tribe, it's a caste. Most interesting, too, is that Leviticus spells out rules that in order to serve at the central shrine, at the altar, you must be blemish-free. Animals that you bring for sacrifice must be free of blemish, and the priests themselves must be free of blemish. Okay, it is the opposite of inclusive society. God does not want to see blemished people or objects. Away, away. That's an area where P's values and our values are very different. One of thousands of things I should say. Okay. Okay, so we've got the tabernacle, we have sacrifices, we have priests. That's where we are in P's world. Now we come to purity and impurity. The key concept in P, now we're in very deep waters, so we'll have to try to get through this quickly or lightly. The sacred must be protected from impurity. The sacred is a synonym for the holy. There are things that are holy and things that are impure, and we need to protect the holy, the sacred, from impurity. What does impurity mean? In P, one can contract impurity by coming in contact with a source of impurity. And P gives you, in those chapters I asked you to look at, it could be a human corpse, could be a corpse of an impure animal, the process of childbirth, sexual discharges, either male or female, or a series of skin maladies, often translated leprosy, but all of us know that's the wrong translation. But what the right translation is problematic. So let's say some kind of mysterious skin disease, scaly disease. All of these persons-objects are impure, and they can come, and they in turn must be kept away from that which is holy. So if you are in a state of impurity or have contracted impurity by touching or coming in contact with a source of impurity, you may not turn around and enter into the temple tabernacle precincts. You may not eat of the sacred meats. If you are a priest, you may not eat of the priestly offerings. How does one get rid of impurity? Answer. P explains to you how to do it. Depending upon the severity of the impurity, you might have to wash, bathe, wash your clothes, wait till nightfall, wait 7 days, or perhaps most mysterious of all, be cleansed by this mysterious mixture prepared by the water, the ashes of a burnt red heifer in Numbers 19. I think we're in a world here similar to that of the world of sacrifices. We moderns look at this stuff and we are just plain flummoxed. What? That's our reaction. What? But that's P. The key point here to keep in mind is that these impurities are nothing to do with sin and nothing to do with dirt. I wrote down sin in the handout. I forgot to write down dirt. Nothing to do with dirt. I'll start with the dirt one. So menstrual blood causes impurity, but urine and feces do not. Urine and feces are dirt. Menstrual blood, however, is impurifying. You can be as dirty as anything from top to bottom and you're not impure, according to P. So P has a very specific list of sources of impurity. Next, these sources have nothing to do with sin. In fact, if you're living a normal life in Israelite society, then impurity of the sort imagined by P is inevitable. And in fact, in some cases, is desirable. You have Israelites who are living a married life. Sooner or later, the woman is going to menstruate. Sooner or later, the woman, we hope, will have a baby. Sooner or later, the husband is going to ejaculate. In Israelite society, we dispose of the dead by burial. Well, sooner or later, you're going to bury a deceased relative, which is only proper and honorable. In other words, if you're living a normal life in society, according to P, you will inevitably, sooner or later, become impure. And that impurity is not a function of sin. That impurity is a function of I'm not sure what it's a function of, but P has a very clear conception of certain kinds of bodily fluids and body activities in the body cause impurity. And once you've contracted it, it is transient. Menstruation will stop. A woman has a child, you wait a certain amount of time, and she can recover her purity, her pure status. A man ejaculates, fine. There's a process by which very quickly the man can recover a state not impurity. This is P's conception of purity. We sometimes, as a result, call it Levitical impurity because it comes from the book of Leviticus. It has to do with Levites and priests. Or sometimes we call it ritual impurity. So the key point then, it's inevitable, it is transient. There are some passages here and there, most famously Leviticus 16, which describes a Day of Atonement ritual, wherein we go from the metaphor. The metaphor of pure and impure becomes a metaphor for absence of sin or sin. But I think it's a metaphor. So Leviticus 16. The original function of Yom Kippur, or in English, Day of Atonement, which is not a good translation, because the original meaning of the word kapar, kippur, was to wipe or to wipe clean. So the original function of the Day of Atonement was to wipe clean the central shrine from accumulated impurities. Because after all, P imagines the tabernacle is right dab in the middle of the camp. There are Israelites living all around the tabernacle. Husbands, wives, children, people are getting born, people are dying. There's impurity everywhere in the camp. So once a year, we need to come into the central shrine and wipe it clean of the accumulated impurities, which are here imagined as a thing, as a polluted substance. The analogy I like to use is like your air conditioner. You can vacuum your house regularly and keep it clean. Once a year, you got to change the filter, and it's filthy. There's accumulated schmutz, as my late mother would have said, right, all over the filter, all over the air conditioner filter. You've been cleaning the house, it doesn't matter. Once a year, you got to clean out the filter. Once a year, the high priest goes into the central shrine and wipes it clean of the accumulated impurities, which inevitably have found their way into the central shrine, and that is a dangerous situation. They need to be removed. That's the original function of the Day of Atonement ritual. You can still see it lurking in Leviticus 16. But that gets connected with then the metaphorical reading in which the wiping clean of the impurity from the altar, and from the Ark of the Covenant, the central shrine, becomes a metaphor for cleansing Israel of its sins. And that's how the day of wiping, Yom Kippur, becomes the Day of Atonement. But you can see levels of meaning in that chapter between the two, especially in that verse, Leviticus 16, verse 30. I can't give you dates of when all these things happen. That's much too complicated. All of this we need to keep separate from Leviticus 18, which is also P, or maybe it's H, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Right, in which we have a different kind of impurity. Here in Leviticus 18, we have a list of prohibited sexual unions, usually translated in English badly as incest, and sexual unions. And if you engage in these prohibited sexual unions in Leviticus 18, then what's going to happen? You are going to impurify the land of Canaan, and God will throw you out. So now we discover there is a new kind of impurity. The other kind was, you recall, inevitable and transient. Whereas this impurity is not inevitable at all. It's because you're bad boys and girls. That's why you have this impurity. And it may not be transient at all. It may be permanent, because God's going to kick you out. The same way God kicked out the Canaanites, God's going to kick you out also. But that also uses the language of impurity. Confusing, no? That language of impurity. Modern scholars say that kind of impurity in Leviticus 18 is danger impurity, is sin impurity. Whereas P, other language of impurity, is referring to ritual impurity. A little confused? Well, read the two chapters. Read Leviticus 18, and you'll see what I'm saying, that this is danger impurity, not to be confused with the impurity caused by a woman in childbirth, caused by a corpse. Anyway, bottom line, language of impurity and purity, P, that's big in P. Contrast D, where it's almost absent. We'll get to D next week. 5, I got 5 minutes or 4 minutes. In addition to impurity and purity, P also has language of holiness, which might be translated sacred. Sacred and holy I'm using these as synonymous terms. Holiness. The holy is where God is. The holy must be protected from impurity. Let me explain this for a second. For P, holy and impure are not exactly opposite categories, but each of them are electric. That is to say, something is holy is suffused with the numinous presence of God. That's holy. Something that isn't holy just is lying there. It's profane. It's nothing. Similarly, something which is impure is suffused with this power of impurity, this danger, or rather, it's electrical. Where something that's pure is simply not impure. What we need to do is to make sure that the impure is kept away from the holy. You commit no sin wandering around in a state of impurity. Menstruating woman, a man after ejaculation, you just buried your late lamented father, you are in a state of impurity. You commit no sin by doing so, as long as you don't go near the holy. That's where sin resides. That's where violating the laws of God reside, is the holy. P has a one of the most amazingly beautiful chapters in P is Leviticus 19. And Leviticus 19 opens with the injunction, as I mentioned earlier, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Right, this is the state to which we Israelites are to aspire. And anyone who likes to make fun of the seemingly mind-numbing and incomprehensible ritual of P needs to look at Leviticus 19, whereas P understands the function of the ritual as a function of holiness. That just as God is holy, we Israelites are to be holy also. Holiness then is important to P, just as purity and impurity are to P. The opposite of holy is profane, not holy. The opposite of impure is not impure. As long as we keep these categories separate, P is happy, or P is content. As we'll see when we get to Deuteronomy, there's almost nothing in Deuteronomy about purity and impurity. That's not Deuteronomy's issue. And Deuteronomy also has something to say about holiness, and we'll see its language, though its rhetoric is different, as we'll see when we get there. Okay, everybody, our time is up. Wish you success in review for the midterm on Friday.
Okay. So everybody's here. Yep. Okay, so I allowed everybody to unmute. I actually wanted to, I wanted to start out, I wanted to go to Leviticus 19, because some of the things he talks about, it really, and it starts with verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall revere your mother and his mother and father, and keep my Sabbath. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God. And one of the, if you go down to verse 9, when you reap the harvest of your land, you should not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger, for I, the Lord, am your God. So, and there's various other things about relationships, but it's fairly powerful. So are there any thoughts on what you just heard? Now, the holiness thing or the purity impurity thing, that's an important point that we need to keep in mind as we go through the course and go through the second part, that purity and being impure is not being in a state of sin. So and it's like the point you made at the end, that it is only if you were to be impure and come into contact with the holy, that then that is a sin. But, you know, if you walk around in your normal, and he says various things that people like, you know, if your parents died, they encourage you to bury your parents. So that's a good, beautiful thing to do. So, but you do become impure, and then there's a lot of rules on how you become pure again. Now, some of this we're familiar with as Christians, for instance, because they talk about it in Luke, where after Mary has had her time after giving birth, they can go to the temple and make a sacrifice. So this pops up in the New Testament as well. So so anyway, any questions?
I was a little confused about, and I guess he didn't want to really, say too much or make definite statements when nothing is definite. I got the idea he's thinking that most of he was added in way after the fact when he was saying that about the tabernacle and everything, that it was written for a good reason, but it wasn't written to address the temple, which is like, centuries later.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They don't know when it was written, but it was not contemporaneous with the Exodus, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. So the intent, well, one interpretation anyway, is the intent was not to tell the story following the Exodus, but was to address concerns about the temple and the destruction of the temple.
Well, about having the temple, the destruction, I don't know, but yeah.
But sort of countering it, I guess. Let's pretend that we used to have something that was better, and it was called a tent, and it was pure, or a tabernacle, and it was pure, and life was good when we lived in a little village. Is this the idea?
That is one possible interpretation, for instance, and he will mention sometimes that, there are two views that some people will talk about the Exodus as being the honeymoon period with God, and other people will say, yeah, you're crazy. So there may be that. Obviously, if you're looking at a community where the expectation, at least they look back and say, we could have our sacrifices at the temple, and anytime we had killed an animal, we could do it at the temple, then that would envision a small community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it was sort of the way they wanted to remember their past, sort of a nostalgia about something that never was.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's nostalgia, which is fine, except for it's nostalgia for something that never was.
Many times nostalgia is something. Nostalgia, many times that is what nostalgia is. It's for something that never was. Something as you would like it to have been.
Yeah, okay.
So it's, as I said at the beginning, this is a fairly complicated territory because we're getting in different strands, and then we'll be hearing about D, which is a totally different set of rules, and there's really not much in the way of narrative. But I guess, like I said, is just keep in mind that these are different strands that come together. Sometimes you can see where they clash. Sometimes you can just sort of see where they go in parallel or conflict with each other. One of the key things about the different rules on sacrifice will come up, for instance, as to where does the sacrifice take place locally, or do you have to go to Jerusalem? And that has a real impact when you start looking at the diaspora, where Jews are like spread all over the Mediterranean, and it's not really convenient for them to go schlepping to Jerusalem. So these are things to keep in mind as we progress. Carol, you're nodding. Any thoughts?
I'm just agreeing with what you've said, Mitch. I don't think I have anything profound to say.
Anybody else? Well, Anita. You want to say something, Danita, or are you just leaning into the camera? I guess you're just leaning into the camera. You muted.
I was just thinking about something. I'm good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, you're good, Danita.
Okay. All right. So I guess we will then adjourn for the evening. I did send out an email. I was looking for input. I know Penny got back to me. But couple different studies I'm looking at. One of them we're actually going to be starting at St. Mark in February, and we can do it with the St. Luke folks. But it's I'm kind of calling it Jesus at the Movies, and because I don't know if some of you we already talked about this, so you know this, but. So there's a TV show called The Chosen. I don't know if anybody's seen it. I know some of you have heard of it.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. So anyways, but so it got. So anyways, and some people want to see it, and we watch Mary and I and the watch it. So it's very well done. But then the question is, because when you read it, we'll look at these things, we experience. Most of us don't have a direct experience of God. People do, but most of us. So usually our experience of Jesus and of God comes to us via some media, be it scripture, primarily maybe, but art, stained glass, statues, films, pictures, you name it. So there's a lot of different media that that Jesus and God come to us through, and that creates. That's our experience of the scripture. So I guess it raises the question, and they're really upfront in The Chosen, that there are quite a few things in The Chosen. They're just sort of their imagination, their creative imagination. But one of the things is that if you look at a lot of art and a lot of other things, a lot of things were the creations of the imagination of whoever created that work. And we'll talk about that in what I had in mind. So anyways, if that's of interest, I was thinking about, and then there's other, I like to call them biblical blockbusters around. So, if you look at them too, and comparing some of those with, and just saying, how does this shape our experience of Jesus and our understanding of what it means? Does this help us to become a better disciple or not? Really would be the question. So anyways, that's something to think about. Like I said, we're going to be starting some of that at St. Mark in February, but we can adjust and do some. I was thinking maybe right now, I'm thinking maybe what we'll do on this course is take a break for the summer, and then we'll do the second half starting in the fall. But then maybe in the summer we could do some of this movie thing, is my thought. We have popcorn and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, sounds good.
So anyways, if you got any favorite Jesus movies, let me know. So, okay, so something to think about. And we'll see you all.
Will that be in addition to our Monday night class?
What I'm thinking about, this would be, now what I'm doing at St. Mark is an addition, but that's mostly for me and a couple other folks here. But for the class itself, it would be a summer thing. I'm thinking about doing it during the summer. And I'm really, that's about all I'm thinking about. I don't have a day, or I thought maybe after church on Sundays, because I don't work on Sundays. But, I haven't really gotten any idea right now what I would, how I would do that. So we could do it live, or we could do it Zoom. It's kind of what people would like to do and what's most convenient for them. I know that people have to come some distance. Maybe it's more comfortable just to do it this way. But some people prefer it live. And I'm sure on Sunday afternoons I can get to either the fellowship hall or the sanctuary at St. Luke. So in the summer.
And mix and match. You can do some at Harkness Chapel.
Where?
At Harkness Chapel.
Oh, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, I know they're a religious person there. They don't call him the chaplain. They call him religious coordinator or something like that.
Oh. Guy in charge.
It's lady in charge.
Oh, lady in charge. Excuse me.
Yeah. Okay, well, have a good night all, and we'll see you next time. Some of you sooner rather than later.
Right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.